Jai Shri Krishna, Namaste, and welcome to Chitty Media's Current Affairs Show. Today we'll be discussing the word fascism. We've heard it a lot recently, and to do that further, we have our very esteemed Pandit Ji, fantastic Hindu leader here in the UK, Pandit Satish Sharma Ji. Pandit Ji, welcome. Jai Shri Krishna.
Ramji, Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Shri Ram. It's a pleasure to be with you, Slonaji, and thank you for picking such a great topic. I think I'm going to really enjoy this, and hopefully our darshkas, our viewers, will gain something from it. And I think we'll discover something about the underbelly of this whole Leicester conversation that's been going on. So great choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Pandit Ji. So yes, with Leicester's recent events, we're hearing a word which I thought was consigned to the history books. Fascism, neo-Nazism, and it's being affiliated with certain media channels as being associated with RSS, BJP, Modi Ji. It's suddenly being branded about as Hindus being fascists, Hindutva being fascists. So can you give us a little bit more insight in what you think fascist means? Because when I look at the Oxford English Dictionary here, where are we? We have fascism, this is the Oxford definition, is an extreme right-wing political system or an attitude that is in favor of strong central government and that does not allow any opposition. That is the definition of fascism. So Panditji, tell us what you believe fascism is and how it's being used wrongly in many opinions with the BJP, with the Leicester events, with Hindus. Can you give us a bit more insight onto that, please?
Well, let me start with a slightly different context. You mentioned Leicester, and I think it's important to keep Leicester in the picture as we discuss this, since that's where this call and this propaganda cry went out. You know, all of a sudden, Hindus are being attacked, and the reason that's being given is somehow that as British nationals, as British Hindus, they are culpable and that they should be subjected to violence and aggression and racism and religiously motivated crimes, just because in the institutions of Bharat, the political establishment, the government is a BJP, Narendra Modi, Hindu, right-wing, extremist, fascist, Nazi government. Okay. It beggars belief. If only 6 months ago somebody had said, oh, in Leicester there are going to be religious riots and they're going to blame Prime Minister Narendra Modi for it, you would have thought, no, that can't happen, not in this world. That is a stretch that's far too remote. And yet here we are. And the reason that we are here where we are is because there were people who introduced that chant onto the streets of Leicester, pushed it into social media, and then it was picked up and mainstreamed by the BBC, by Channel 4, by The Guardian. They're the people who have really amplified this chant. So it's vital that we have a look at the fascism of the BJP. So you're right, your definition is great. It's a good definition. The last time it was really given popular, shall we say, an airing was during the Second World War, when, you know, we had, I think, Benito Mussolini. He was the first one who officially adopted this notion of power being all-encompassing, all-consuming, and in the hands of a very small number of people, or the state itself, and there being no mechanisms for changing the people who are ruling you. If I recall, the actual word relates to a time of the Roman Empire when a bundle of sticks with a protruding sharp blade was deemed to be the symbol of rulership. And the name of that particular sort of weapon was fasces. And so he took that as his symbol. That was going to be his symbol. And that was what gave form to the political ideology of fascism. But the definition that you've given is absolutely right. It's authoritarian. It's conventionally associated with the extreme right wing. But we have to remember that the Nazis were actually the extreme left wing. They started off life as the Socialist Workers' Party. And so it's an extreme ideology which says, we know what's good for you, you don't know what's good for you, and even if it's painful for you, it doesn't matter because we're doing what's right. It's the ultimate expression of institutionalized slavery, if you were to look at its tattva. It's a political mechanism for slavery. When you look at it from that point of view, I'm going to broaden the definition. What the European Christian West applied to the global South was fascism. Colonialism is a very nice Victorian China teacup sort of word for fascism inflicted upon people of color throughout the global South. So, let's spell that out. The British Empire was a fascist empire from the perspective of those who were enslaved by it. And you can see this in many of the actions and many of the remarks, comments that history has recorded, which have come down to us from the royal family. We all know Edward was very closely tied with the Nazis, that he believed in white supremacy. Most people don't know that Winston Churchill, at the end of the Second World War, there was a meeting he had with, in America, Washington, with the Vice President Wallace, and they were talking about the grand narrative and the grand vision for a post Second World War world. And Churchill's remark, and it's recorded, was it has to maintain white supremacy, which is an entirely fascist statement. Most people don't associate Churchill with fascism. And yet, when we consider he was also probably the first European leader to sanction the use of chemical weapons against civilian populations, that's the sort of action of a fascist. If we consider what history has recorded about the way in which the British challenged the Greek people during the revolution, British soldiers used to behead Greek citizens and put their heads onto poles and display them. And when they were challenged on it, they said, well, this is what they are used to and what they expect. And that was under Churchill's watch. That sounds to me like the actions of a fascist. It's remarkable that Churchill is deemed to be the savior of Europe and the West. But those historians who've studied the details of the world wars, they know that the Second World War was won by three factors, one of which was the Russian Red Army, who had huge losses. The second was the provision of US weaponry. And the third was the sheer volume of soldiers and resources which were provided to the war effort by what was the empire, but hugely dominated by the Indian subcontinent. Those are the three factors which won the war. And yet Churchill's contribution in there is, frankly speaking, minimal. And yet, as I've said, the actions I've described, they're the actions that I would expect to see under a fascist regime and a fascist leader. Was Churchill a fascist? Well, let's see what history actually records. Now that the history books which were created by those governments who we're saying need to be scrutinized, those history books are being rewritten by other records, normally records from those who suffered at their hands, which I would suggest are more reliable than the ones of perpetrators. So fascism has never been far from Europe's shores. Fascism, when it's inflicted upon people of color and people of other races and other religions, it doesn't seem to have registered in the Euro-Christian mind that actually that too is fascism. So these are the actions of some of the people who I would suggest display the traits of fascists. If there's one example I can use to make it even more contemporary, at least 151,000 Iraqis died in very violent death because of the Iraq War. It was a war which was not democratically sanctioned. Do you remember the million marchers who said, no, this war is not correct?
I was one of them on a Saturday afternoon.
Yep. And yet, Britain's armies went to war against Iraq on the basis of completely falsified evidence. Right? There was no evidence to support that England could be attacked within 45 minutes. There was no evidence to support weapons of mass destructions, etc., etc., etc. A whole civilizational fountainhead was reduced to rubble on the most spurious of bases, and the Iraqi people were robbed of their national resources and national wealth. And who was it who did all of this? Tony Blair, Sir Tony Blair, who was awarded a knighthood. And so when we look at these people who are alleging that Prime Minister Modi is a fascist, we need to perhaps adopt a slightly broader evidence base and then judge him accordingly. So I've just given you some examples of people who I think qualify for this label of fascism, or at least participating and being complicit and supporting fascism. So I hope our viewers will have appreciated that little walk through history.
Yes, no, absolutely, Panditji. So coming back to India, the RSS, BJP, somehow they've been dragged into these Leicester, troubles that we've had there. With, again, we all know the truth and what actually caused it at the Ganpati Puja. So I'm not quite sure why or how or who or exactly where the RSS are now being accused of this.
It's a question that needs to be scrutinized. So let's sort of delve under the surface of this a little bit more. So on the one hand, we have those groups who were attacking Hindu mandirs and shouting hate speech, all of those derogatory tropes and very, very vicious, violent, threatening statements that were being made. They are the people who were also chanting Modi, fascist, RSS, BJP, Hindutva, Nazi. Okay. Now we know that the statements made by that particular group have been repeatedly proven to be false. They're the same people who were saying that a mosque had been attacked. That didn't happen. They were the same people who put into the media space the allegations that a Muslim girl, an attempted abduction had occurred, and that it was Hindus that were responsible. That didn't happen. It was a lie. It was a fake. It was false. And many of the other things that were said were also false. Lie after lie has come tumbling down. And so they are the same people who were then also chanting Modi, Nazi, fascist, Hindutva. And so if we look at their track record and their credibility, that on its own should be enough to get any reasoned, unbiased, balanced observer to say, well, hang on a minute, the source is not credible, and so we should not take this source any further. Okay. So firstly, there is a very good reason for saying, well, actually, if everything else that these people were saying is a complete bundle of lies and hate speech, then maybe this might also qualify. And that on its own should be enough to say there's a problem with this statement. But we turn to the second group, which is the mainstream media. They abandoned all of these standards. Right? They're the ones who should have said, hold on a minute. We have had 6 or 7 statements made, all of which say Hindus are terrible, nasty people, all of which have been debunked and the police have refuted. So maybe we should scrutinize this a little bit more, because we are the mainstream media. We are the guardian. Guardian of what? Guardian of perhaps journalistic standards? We are the independent. Okay. We are the world famous BBC, now becoming famous for a completely different level of reporting. And they tout their standards. They have charters. They have appearances in front of select committees where they trot out all of their virtuous approach to reporting unbiased news. And yet, when it came to dealing with the Hindus, they threw all of those standards under a bus and came straight out and said, oh yes, allegations have been made, and it's, a connection between the BJP, the RSS, Hindutva, is now being asserted. And then you have the Nazi fascist trope subliminally being experienced by everybody. And so the BBC and these mainstream outlets, they are entirely culpable in 2 things from my point of view. One is inciting further religious hatred. They amplified the hate speech that was going on. But second, I think in a very short space of time, questions are going to be asked about whether the BBC was culpable, whether the Guardian was culpable, whether Channel 4 was culpable in the, shall we say, the covering up of the ethnic cleansing of Hindus from that area of Leicester. Because the evidence is still coming out that, in fact, the intention was to purge that area, which many people, including Radio 4 and others, casually refer to as a Muslim area. How can there be a Muslim area? How can there be a Hindu area? We're supposedly British citizens enjoying and participating in the experiment of diverse multicultural coexistence. And if it turns out that, in fact, in, let's say, 6 months to a year's time, the demographic of that area has changed, and it has changed to the detriment of the Hindus who were making their homes there, then I think there's a very strong case for scrutinizing the behavior of these organizations from the point of view of having been complicit in ethnic cleansing in this country, ethnic cleansing of Hindus in Leicester, in the United Kingdom in 2022. Now, who is the fascist in all of this? Remember, fascism is not possible unless you have a very powerful propaganda arm, unless you have people determined to conceal the true perpetrators of fascism, the true deniers of human freedoms and religious freedoms. It's not possible unless you have propaganda merchants. And are we genuinely now seeing that the Channel 4 News, that the BBC, that the Guardian are actually nothing other than those who would willingly and knowingly abandon their standards, condone and conceal acts of ethnic cleansing? So who is the fascist? Who is the fascist in this conversation?
No, absolutely. I mean, like you said, the mainstream media, they seem to be mouthpieces for Hindu-phobic rhetoric. In fact, there was a demonstration a couple of weeks ago, and we've actually done a video clip which viewers can see up here on the link where we discuss that further. But yes, Panditji, how can we go moving forward? Because this tropes doesn't seem to have stopped. It's still being pushed around as neo-Nazis, RSS, BJP, right-wing, Hindutva, you know, it's...
So let's do our little bit. It's a tiny bit, but it will have an impact, okay? So we've looked at what happened here in this country with regard to the Leicester issue and the appearance of this trope, of this hate speech, this vilification by association. Let's look at the record of this terrible person and this unbelievably horrible party, this BJP, this monster that is destroying freedoms in India. Here in the United Kingdom, we have a population of some 68 million people, and the governments are elected by tiny numbers. And in fact, the current leader of the Conservative Party was elected by what, 81,000 people? Now, this is the level of democracy that we're talking about in this tiny little island called the United Kingdom. A population of 68 million. And yet democracy is great here. You know, everything is fine. Nobody is pointing fingers at the British democracy. Let's have a look at India. And, you know, in terms of scale, in 2014, those who were eligible for voting was some 554 million people. Okay, so British Isles, okay, and every member of that population is eligible to vote. All right, out of that huge number, can you guess how many people actually voted or came out and voted for the BJP? Right, 180 million came and voted for Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the BJP. And those elections are the biggest elections, I think, in history. Some of the statistics I remember at the time, just jotting down, there were 1.4 million voting machines. Just get a scale of how many voting machines that there are in an election with 1.4 million voting machines up and down the country. And yet nobody found fault with the election process. It was an unchallenged and accepted as a valid exercise in democracy. And that has never happened in history. Never have 180 million people came out and gave one person and the party that one person represents such a democratic mandate. It hasn't happened.
It happened again. They won a second time with an even bigger victory.
It dwarfs Euro-Christian democracies in a totally different scale. I mean, in 2019, I think there were 600 million people who actually voted. So that's 10 times the population of these British Isles, right, actually participate in the democratic exercise. And of those, there were 230 million who voted a second time round to support Prime Minister Modi and the BJP, okay? And if you are going to sort of point the finger of fascism at this party, what you're actually saying is one of two things. Either the Indian voting public is not sophisticated enough to recognize that they have a fascist at the helm, and that we European observers, we know better about these things. So we can say that you've got fascists, but you don't even know. It's that colonial sort of superciliousness. That's right. Either you're saying that, right, or the statement you're making is a falsehood. It's not borne out in reality. It's not borne out in fact. And if we sort of explore a little bit further, 229 million is, if you take everybody in the United Kingdom, 70,000 of them, 70 million of them, and let's assume that all of them voted unanimously for the leader of a political party in this country, you would still have less people voting for that leader than Prime Minister Modi ji has got. Okay? Yeah, it's just, yeah. And so, suddenly you start to think, well, hang on, this is like a mosquito sort of biting an elephant and claiming that the elephant is somehow, in some way, shape, or form, not up to its standards. I suppose even mosquitoes have psychoses. Maybe that's also possible. But that's the reality of it. That's the figures, and that's the scale of what has been achieved. Not once has he received a democratic mandate, but twice, and an increasingly democratic mandate. And so how does that conform to the dictionary definition of fascism? It doesn't. In fact, the opposition party, the Congress Party, when it imposed what they called the emergency on the Indian population, when they imposed forced sterilization of citizens, those are the actions of fascism. Right? Let's be sort of really clear. Those are the actions of fascists. So we have a European political class and their paid for media all shouting fascist, fascist, Modi, Modi, BJP, Nazi, and so on and so forth, whilst their own history is littered with the actions that are consistent with fascism, even in the 21st century. And on the other hand, we have a Congress party which actually inflicted a fascistic approach and control on India, also trumpeting the same repeated statements. And then on the other hand, you have a party which the people have repeatedly voted for. They appreciate the scale of what the people have done, and they themselves are rewarding a democratic government with a vote and a mandate time and time again. And this is so difficult for the Western power structures and media structures to possibly swallow, that there are these funny brown people with this Hindu ethos who are doing democracy better than we've ever done it. They're out democratizing us. And, how on earth can we complain? Oh, let's make some sort of a name-calling, identitarian politicking, and we'll use that to besmirch their reputation. But it's not working. I watched in the United Nations General Assembly some speakers from a number of countries who very warmly expressed how much they appreciated the support that India, that Prime Minister Modi, that the BJP gave to their nations when they were struggling under COVID. Remember, India gave 70 nations vaccines, and not at profit, because Prime Minister Modi said, we cannot profit from the suffering of other human beings. This is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, in action. That's not the action of a fascist. That's not the behavior of a Nazi party. And I think there were several South American nations who had been threatened by Pfizer and some of the big corporations in America. The demands had been made that we need to be able to have bases in your country in order for us to give you the vaccinations. Now, that's the actions of a fascistic mind. That's what a fascist really would be. And in this world, even today, when I sort of spread my vision across, there are many countries which have the authoritarian command governance profiles associated with fascism. We have the World Cup coming up very soon in Qatar, and Swedes have just announced that they're going to protest the absence of human rights and the prevalence of slavery means of control, and they're going to do it by toning down their shirts and their jerseys and not take their families over there. I mean, this is the nature in which the West finds it suitable to protest, when the substance of fascism is there, if not the label of fascism. So I think many of these things into account, we have a slightly different story being played out.
Absolutely. Going back to some of the things that you said, you've expressed how Modiji is very dharmic with his Hindu values, not charging people for their suffering, helping. So basically, if we go back to Hindutva, it's actually quite the opposite of fascism, don't you think?
Let's repeat that so that those who are hard of hearing and hard of comprehension understand it clearly. Let's say that Prime Minister Modi, the BJP, are Hindutva parties. This is the allegation. Their actions are to supply 70 countries with vaccines at cost and not make a profit. That's not fascism. That's the antithesis of fascism. That's the opposite of fascism. The actions of the BJP are openly democratic. If they're not democratic, then find somebody else who has done democracy better. Find somebody else who's arranged for over 1 million voting machines and repeatedly has received the democratic mandate from the nation. That's Hindutva. Remember, in Hindutva, the foundational principle is that to be a human being is a good thing. It's a divine thing. And that in each of us, there is a spark of divinity present. And that the body is just clothing, but the beautiful part of a human being is that little glimmer of divinity that is inside of us, waiting to be recognized and waiting to find articulation. And if that's your vision, and that's what Prime Minister Modi's policy internationally has been, then that's Hindutva. And you're absolutely right. Hindutva is, by essence, by tattva, and in action, the complete polar opposite of fascism.
So basically, we need to reclaim the word Hindutva. It's a beautiful ideology, but it's been tarnished as something very negative. We need to own that and make it clear that Hindutva is actually very beautiful, and it's all encompassing for the whole world. Like you said, he's helped 70 countries with Hindutva.
Well, I think we do need to reclaim it. And one of the ways in which we reclaim things is to deny those people who have vested interests which are not aligned with our own well-being. We deny them the right to define it. This is fundamental. And remember, in the West, a person can happily say, I identify as this pronoun. And it's accepted that they have the right of self-identification. And if you actually then dispute it, there are people who have denied a person's claim to be identified with one gender, and they have suffered as a result. They've lost employment, they have been brought in front of statutory and legislative bodies, and that's because they have a right to self-define. Like in many things, Hindus have that same right, but we're denied that right by people who seem to assume a higher moral ground and say, we can tell you what Hindutva is, we will define it for you, allow us to create the straw man, and then we can give that straw man a damn good thrashing at every opportunity, because we know when we hurt that straw man, it actually vilifies and besmirches you. They have no right to do this. Nobody has that right to do it to each other. You know, Hindus, we don't do this. We don't go around and saying, oh, you're Republicans, and therefore, you know, here's a bogeyman that we're going to create to harm your vision of what existence is about. And yet there are very aggressive, undemocratic, fascist ideologies which say we have the right to define your identity for you. And if that isn't authoritarian control, if that isn't the seeds of fascism, then what is? So those people who watch this, if you're not part of the Hindu family, you have no right to define us anymore. You know, in colonial times, that was something you appropriated and stole, but you do not have that right. It needs to be returned to us. Only Hindus can define how they wish to live in their homes, their nation, within their families and their communities. And if it's not causing anybody else any difficulty, then what business is it of yours?
Yes, I think you're right there. They can't seem to shake off the shackles of colonialism. They have to, pigeonhole us still and label us and brand us. And no, thank you. I am a Hindutva. I'm a proud Hindutva. It's a beautiful ideology. It's a beautiful philosophy, and we can see the positive effects of it. So I think, yes, we should all wear it with pride and on our sleeves and reclaim it back.
Well, there are 70 countries, as I've said, at least, who have appreciated the principles of Hindutva being present in the manner in which diplomacy is now being conducted. And so those who are challenging it, those who are wanting to vilify us on that basis, they're actually engaged in a losing battle. In the end, what is real will surface. And we have this as a national sort of statement, don't we? Satyam evam jayate, that which is real will persist, will survive, will be victorious. And as the truth of what it is, what Hindutva really means, from a Hindu's point of view, Hindutva is Hinduness. That is exactly what the word means in the vocabulary, in the language in which that word exists. And so Hinduness is our right to determine and define what it is, nobody else's. And it is a good thing, in the same way that we believe that every human being is divine and capable of living with harmony. So is every single person who adheres to, or follows, or explores, or relishes, or even inquires about the Hindutva way of looking at things. It is Hinduness in action. And Prime Minister Modi, the BJP, and indeed the RSS, they have always acted according to the principles of Hinduness.
Yes, Panditji, that's been a really insightful discussion. If you have a few minutes, I want to put you on the spot because we never got to speak last week, but there was something trending with PFI being banned, and it was all over the place. And I just wanted your thoughts on it because a lot of people are out there now saying, let India become a Hindu Rashtra. People are calling for this because the PFI obviously wanted to Islamify India by 2047, I think it was. So a lot of people are saying we need to protect India and make it a Hindu Rashtra. What do you think about this?
It's a wonderful topic, and you have put me on the spot. So bear with me as I sit back and allow the teachings of the Rig Veda, which asserts, "Let good thoughts come to us from all directions." So I'm just waiting to receive good thoughts from all directions on this subject. But so let's just turn to this Hindu Rashtra notion. Rashtra and governance is really the key. The manner in which one person chooses to live their life influences everybody else around them. And the manner in which a family lives influences their community. The manner in which community lives influences the whole of society. And so Bharat is a nation, Bharat that was Bharat before it became India, and Bharat that will be Bharat when it ceases to be India, when it returns to being India, returns to being Bharat. That Bharat is the living incarnation of the value systems of every single person of that civilization, what they have learned, what they experienced, what they valued, and what they then shared and taught to other people around them. So Bharat has always been a Hindu Rashtra because Hindus themselves govern themselves according to dharmic principles. And the only thing that has been taken away is that when the Delhi Sultanate was there, and the Muslim rulers from the Turkish and then the Iranis and the Afghanis and so on, when they came, they imposed a model of governance which was alien to the actual indigenous people of that civilization. When the British came, they did exactly the same. They imposed a set of words and ideas and laws and rules. And remember, all of these words and laws and ideas and rules are merely statements made by human beings. And we buy into them, and therefore they have power. And so the people who did this to the Hindu nation and the Hindu people and the Hindu civilization, they temporarily injected into the mind of the civilization some craziness. And anybody who looks at the legislation that the British left there will see that it is terrible. If you want an example of fascist legislation, have a look at the British acts which were left in place to destroy the identity of the Hindus after the British had gone. Then you will see fascism enacted.
Yes.
It's there in every word and every deed, and the intention is crystal clear. And so the Hindu people themselves, the Bharatiyas from Kanyakumari all the way up to Kailash and Mount Everest and so on, those people have always lived according to Hindu ideals, dharmic values. And therefore the substance, the tattva of that civilization, it's always been a Hindu Rashtra. The only thing that's left now is to remove these alien judiciary, legislative processes and procedures, because they are adharmic, they are harmful. They are not in accordance with the values of how human beings should live. They are the relics left over by people who enslaved nations. And so they need to be removed. And when they are removed, that returning to a judicial system which reflects the values of the people who are subject to that judicial system, that's what a Hindu Rashtra is. And nobody should have any reason to object to that. In fact, anybody who objects to it really needs to consider who, what their position, where they're centering their argument, where are they standing, on what ground are they establishing it, on what legitimacy are they making those remarks. Because if you're standing on a value system which has demonstrated its capacity to destroy civilizations, indigenous civilizations across the planet, that's shaky ground to stand on, to then say, oh no, we don't want a Hindu Rashtra. Right? And so the Hindu Rashtra is present because the Hindu people, the Hindu civilization are present. And wherever we go, the way in which we live is an indication of what a Hindu Rashtra is. The fact that there are 329 persons in the United Kingdom imprisoned or enjoying Her Majesty's hospitality, as some would say, that is an indication of what a Hindu Rashtra would be. That's the percentages. Imagine if the whole of Britain had the
0%. That is less than 0% of Hindus, the lowest prison population in the UK. They can't even give it a percent.
Yeah, in a Hindu Rashtra, we don't even feature as a rounding error in statistics. 0% is their attempt to round downwards. But this is the notion of what a Hindu Rashtra is. And the foundational understanding is that every human being who is born divine, is born without hatred, born without malice. That we are the pinnacle creation of the earth and divinity working together. And if that's where we're starting, then what on earth is there to be unhappy about? We have got a backdrop where we recognize that somewhere along the life of a child, a person filled with hatred and filled with rage and violence infects that child, who is divinity manifest, with hatred and violence. And that's what has to be caught. And the issue is that people who have been doing that, they leverage that ability to acquire power and wealth. And they're the ones who are frightened, because in a Hindu Rashtra, that capacity is being seriously questioned. The PFI have been institutionally engaged in planting the seeds of this hatred, this search for power and control. They have been planting that in a whole generation. And that's why they are so unhappy. And in fact, anybody who challenges the very premises of a Hindu Rashtra has either an ulterior motive or no knowledge of what a Hindu Rashtra is, has always been. And so they really need to step back and do some more searching and investigation. But a Hindu Rashtra is a good thing, like a Hindu community is a good thing, like a Hindu civilization is a good thing. And so Hindu Rashtra naturally is a good thing.
Yes, because you've said that beautifully, because the PFI did plant seeds, but those seeds seem to have backfired because people are saying, we want the word secular removed from the constitution. They had the PFI and their ilk just worked with the majority, brought peace to all. We wouldn't be in this position, but it's really backfired now.
Saloniji, you mentioned the word secular, and just returning back to the way in which fascist organizations and governments work, it will take a fascist to say in a democratic country, without reference to parliament, without a mandate from the people, we are going to insert into the constitution the word secular socialist. And that's what they did. That's what the Congress Party did. And that is entirely consistent with an authoritarian regime which has got no appreciation for the democratic wishes of the people. And so, in Bharat, yes, we do have a political party whose profile and actions do meet the profile and actions of a fascist party, but it's not the BJP.
No. Panditji, thank you so much for your time today and for those beautiful insights. A lot of eye-opening statements there. I hope people really do process what's been said, because, pretty paramount. Thank you once again for your time. Any final thoughts?
Yes, you mentioned good thoughts, and there are good thoughts coming to me. And for those in the New York Times who have been trumpeting this BJP Nazi fascist mantra for a while now, well, actually, mantra is not the word, but sort of trumpeting this trope for a while, it's also worth recognizing that when Hitler's armies traipsed across the continent of Europe and Northern Africa, they were driving vehicles, trucks, and those trucks had engines manufactured by Ford. That the petrol that was driving those vehicles was provided by American oil companies such as Standard Oil. That the manufacturers of the gas which was used to wreak such violent suffering on the Jewish people, was manufactured by companies with American origins. So let's step back a little bit and be perhaps a little more reflective before we start throwing around these tropes, fascist, Nazi, etc., etc.
Yes,
Swamiji, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. Jai Shri Krishna, Jai Shri Ram.
Jai Shri Ram, Jai Shri Krishna. Om.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.